are here at beautiful Rock Creek in the heart of the Sierra Nevada mountains, just north of Nevada City, California. Let's look at diagonal seams in ancient concrete. Now this is a persistent, consistent theme of my videos because all we find is the lower layers of creek beds and riverbeds, 45-degree angle diagonal seams in that construction. An approximate 45 to the flow of the river, or we could say an approximate 45 to the line between the hills. Okay, so let's check it out. I'm just going to follow this line. Alright, so that line goes through. The reason there was a little shrub there is because it found a little space in this seam to grow. We're going to follow this seam along. We're going to see what angle it is to the flow of the river. So we see it's a 45 to the flow of the river, just as we saw in Texas. Now we're all the way across the continent. Texas is in essentially the middle of the continent. So we're half a continent away, and we have the same 45-degree angle riverbed construction. Let's move over here, and we'll see how that's a 45 but going the other way. So we have two different 45-degree angles, right? And guess what? They meet right here. So that's that's the meeting point right there. And that's the meeting point right there of those angles. Okay, so I'm going to follow that along. There it goes. So those seams, those integral seams, tell us, because they are at a 45, they tell us that this is a riverbed. Now we didn't need to be told that because we have the river, we have the creek flowing, right? But all these seams are at 45s to the flow of the river, which is that way. We could also say these are at 45-degree angles to the line between the hills. Got a hill on the left, got a hill on the right. All right, so we're going to move downstream. This might have been a channel that was consciously built. In that case, this is simply a section face on the right. And of course, inside there, we got a section face on the left, creating that channel. But we have a parallel line right here. We could call it a seam. It's so integral, it's hard to even really see it, except for the coloration. If the coloration wasn't here, you might not even notice the seam. It's so strong. These angles are approximate 45s to the flow of the river, which is that way. So this huge structure right here, this huge block, is telling us that this is a riverbed. It's saying, look at this 45-degree angle we have. You're in a riverbed. Oh, okay. I'll watch out for water then. It's a message to the future. It's just that the future isn't paying attention because we've been schooled in something called geology. Then we have the similar 45s, right? We can see that angle here, and it meets the opposing 45 right there. All right. Continues on. You see the seam continue on way down there. Parallel seam there, parallel seams in the river banks. So all those are 45s approximately to the flow of the river, right? Then we move down here and we see these angles. Approximate 45s to the flow of the river. There's the angle. There's the river flow. So all we see is opposing 45-degree lines. More 45-degree lines. Let's pull back and see what this looks like. And we'll notice that it's closely paralleling the section on the left, right? And we have two parallel lines that go and go and go. Okay? So, then more parallel lines. All we see is opposing 45s in this riverbed. We can just look down here. Okay? In this other layer. It's so obviously constructed because we see the geometry. And pulling back, we see again the incredible scale of the building and the smooth faces of these 45-degree angles, right? And this seam goes all the way back here. So let's start here. This is the seam, right? This section face is essentially regular, and it joins this section face very strongly. It's not a fracture, it's not breaking apart, it's strong, integral. And then we have the smooth section face, like the side of a building. And by the way, it's inclined. It's inclined into the face of the uphill side of the creek. Really, really strong engineering. It's not leaning the other way. So this is really smart building, because the weight of the material is leaning to the left toward the uphill side. So that's what we also find in the hills in South Africa. All the material is inclining into the face of the hill, whichever way you're facing. Same with the structures in Bosnia. It's always inclined in. So amazing engineering. So all these lines, which appear chaotic and random, are actually engineered. But this is where the playfulness of the ancients comes in, okay? When we're children, we pick up a paintbrush, we immediately start to play. So we're masters of play when we're 3 or 4 years old. But we lose that because of our education. And Monet said that the only thing that he had to recover from in later life as a master painter was his education, his training. So once he recovered from that, he was able to truly paint masterpieces because he recovered his playfulness, you know? So advanced engineers had the ability to create whatever they wanted with this material that we call stone, but which is in fact ancient concrete, magic recipes of concrete mixed by very smart people in the past, very smart races, whether we would call them human or not, hard to know. And they also had the ability to recapture the playfulness of youth and to do beautiful texturing of the tops, beautiful shapes. Geology would call this erosion. I would say that many of these surfaces were created exactly as we find them. So this pool here, with all the curves in it, is a result of highly advanced people playing with their material because they can. Also, we know that in the pyramids on the Giza Plateau, the advanced people who built those pyramids, long before the pharaohs got there to play the game of kings, by the way, the larger pyramids were not built by the pharaohs at all. The smaller pyramids were built by the pharaohs to emulate the larger pyramids, and the smaller pyramids are already crumbling in the shadow of these giant, sophisticated pyramids that were built probably millions of years before, or at least hundreds of thousands of years before the pharaohs ever got there. The pharaohs were royal refugees from the exploded planet Tiamat, and they crash landed in Antarctica, and then they came to Cairo and said, oh, let's enslave the people and play the game of kings. So we find in the Great Pyramid and in the other astonishing larger pyramids on the Giza Plateau, built long before the pharaonic dynasties, an engineering that shows us that they understood that earthquake mitigation could be achieved best by using stones that were unique. They were odd sizes, always different sizes. They understood that the earth will have earthquakes and that their construction needed to resist those tectonic forces, those massive tectonic forces, and that the best way to resist them was to create different angles so the stresses could be dissipated throughout their structures. Now, I also want to note that these rivulets in this creek bed here, when the water is low and there's just a little bit of water, they're showing us where the channels are And the channels, I would argue, were created in ancient times purposely to channel water in a specific way. I would argue that this is not erosion. I would argue that this curving line was created exactly as you see it, with essentially no erosion over time, because this material is so hard. I would argue that this channel here was created with essentially no erosion over time. And a geologist would say, well, of course it was carved by the water, because we know that the Grand Canyon was carved a mile deep over time by water. But in fact, that's incorrect. The Grand Canyon was not carved by water. The Grand Canyon was created in a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes by electric discharge from another planet, and all that material was thrown up into space or up into our atmosphere. So some came back down to Earth, but a lot of it was thrown up into space and landed on other planets. This is not necessarily the result of erosion over time. I believe that this was created specifically by advanced architects, advanced engineers who wanted to channel water just like this, specifically for the purpose of creating turbulence, and that turbulence would create negative ions. Negative ions are very healthy for life, so they kill viruses and bacteria. We sell negative ion producing machines for homes and offices to increase the vitality of the air, to increase the potential of the air we're breathing to give us health. So this is a health-giving channel right here. And up there's a little health-giving channel. It's creating turbulence. I would argue that the way they shape their river and their riverbeds and creek beds creates the maximum beneficial turbulence in the water. Now, Victor Schauberger has diagnosed riverbeds and creek beds extensively and said that to advance our technology, we must comprehend and copy nature. But this is not nature. This is building in the ancient past. So what we would want to do if we were going to copy the past is to copy ancient techniques for creating curving, channeled, 45-degree angle sections that move the water in specific ways and whose sections and layers stay strong throughout the ages. But I think it's a question primarily of water movement, water turbulence, water direction, and that the water is the key to it all. So I think that the advanced ancient engineers, the advanced ancient architects were designing their 45-degree angle base structure creeks and their channeled creek beds, right? And their channeled riverbeds, specifically to change water, to work with water, to release the magic of water.